This conference will now be recorded.
I'm sorry, Director Houston, you were going to say?
Well, by my clock, it's 12:59, so I think we have to wait a couple seconds longer, right?
Yeah, it's 24 seconds.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, I'll wait till I start, but to say welcome to everybody.
Welcome. It's 1 o'clock.
Perfect. Thank you, Don. It is 1 o'clock. All right. So with that, I'm going to call this meeting to order. We do have a quorum. Both the chair and the member are present. And let's see, is there any public comment, Patrick?
Chairman Houston, no, there's not.
Okay. And any presentations?
There are no presentations today.
Okay, great. And now I am going to take the agenda just a little out of order because we do have some guest speakers. So we're going to go to the information calendar first, item 6A, our legislative updates, and then we'll go back to the action calendar a little bit later. So with that, Patrick.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Houston, members of the committee, members of the board, staff, and to our guests. Thank you for taking that out of order. As you mentioned, we do have Emily Pappas and Jamie Miner here from Sacramento, our state lobbyists. And Emily is going to give us a sort of a post-election impacts for California, what she sees out there, and discuss a little bit about the open Senate seat. And Jamie will be talking about some of the propositions and some of the committees and some of the changes in that arena. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Emily to get us going, and then EJ will come in at the end and do his regular report. But this way we can have our discussion with Emily and Jamie, and then allow them to continue with the rest of the day. Thank you.
Great, thank you everyone. And for those that I can still see on the top of my square or who I heard dial in, President and other board members, hi, nice to see your faces, and it makes things feel somewhat normal since we actually get to see you, not in person, but these kind of things are great for us, so thank you. So yeah, as Patrick mentioned, I just wanted to go through a little bit about what we were expecting in the election, what we saw, what it means for the district with the legislative races as well as the propositions, and then what we expect legislatively next year. So as far as the elections goes, I think we were all expecting a blue tsunami this year, especially acknowledging that a lot of registered Democrats coming out in the state, with issues against President Trump would call for significant Democratic wins, whether it was on the ballot, proposition measures or in races. And then also we had a lot more young and diverse, electorates, voters coming out that typically hadn't come out in the, in past elections. So what was the result? Definitely, as far as the next president, Biden and Harris were at the top of the ticket with 64% of the California vote, and that was expected and by everyone. And we picked up the Democrats picked up some seats in the California Senate, whereas the Assembly, I think, didn't change as much as the Democrats thought we would have, especially again with so many Democrats coming out against Trump and for Biden. And I think the other really telling thing were the progressive lost big time on some of the big ballot measures they were either pushing or against. Several, or actually all of the ones that had passed basically legislatively were basically overturned on the ballot this cycle. And so Jamie will talk about those more in detail later on, but I think those were big, significant changes. So as far as what the election means on our legislature, we'll start with the state Senate. The Democrats in the Senate had a really good election night, winning 2 seats in Orange County. As you know, traditionally Orange County has been more on the conservative front. And so the Democrats picked up 2 seats, and 2 seats are still in contention. If the results hold, the Democrats would have a net increase of 2 seats in the Senate, moving the Senate Republican makeup from 31 to 9 advantage over Republicans and widening the supermajority that they already held. I think that's definitely big news. Both Republicans from Orange County, Senator John Morlock and Senator Ling Cheng, lost their bids by close margins. In San Bernardino County, which is Senate District 23, Republican member Bo appears to be holding to Senator Mike Morrell, a Republican seat. And Senator Scott Wilk, again, a current sitting Republican senator, looks to be holding his seat in Senate District 21. I would say on the Assembly side, I don't think we were expecting the Republicans to hold their seats like they did. They had a better election night than on the Senate side. Going into Election Day, I think many believed that the Republicans could lose 4 seats. And Assembly District 38, you'll recall, was already won by the Republicans when Assemblywoman Christy Smith won that, a Democrat won that congressional seat to Republicans, won earlier. And so that definitely was going to Republicans, but it will be something that the Democrats aim to get back in 2022. And so as far as the overall makeup, Democrats still have an overwhelming advantage of 60 to 19 and 1 decline to state. So the Assembly will also be a supermajority. And what does this all mean for our water district? We've come to Sacramento, we've met with all your delegation. The only change for you really is Senator Holly Mitchell leaving the Senate down for her local race. And so with that, I think Assemblywoman Sydney Keimliger-Dove is who it looks like folks are getting behind. Initially, several folks, including Assemblywoman Autumn Burke, had potentially looked or explored or opened seats, depending on who it is, for that race. But I think at this point, it sounds like Sydney Keimliger-Dove is earning some early endorsements by folks like Kevin DeLeon, Senator Ben Allen, State Controller Betty Yee, Congresswoman Karen Bass, and again, former Senator, now Supervisor Holly Mitchell. So that special election date has not been called by the governor. We expect it to be early in the year, and as soon as governor sends out his press release as to when that election will be called, we'll just be sure to send it to you as an FYI, since sometimes things overlap and are of impact, or at least of interest to you all. So I'm going to pass it over to Jamie to go over propositions and what to expect next year as far as the Biden change.
Yeah, thanks. So as Emily alluded to, we're increasingly seeing this strategy of the ballot really becoming a tool for special interests to use to either overturn something they didn't like, that passed in the legislature, or to pass something that they don't think, the legislature could pass, like a large tax increase. So, this year really was no difference. In fact, it set a lot of records for the amount of money that was spent. Just the amount of airtime ads that I'm sure you all saw and were sick of. I think, at the top of that was Prop 22, which failed, but it was pushed by the gig economy companies to overturn AB 5, which, as you know, would have reclassified their workers as employees. So $206 million was spent by the Yes campaign. So it just really goes to show the power that money has at the ballot box and, influencing voters. And I think, the legislature is going to have to think hard and long before putting something on, or, before they tend to wait until the very last minute to pass something. And it goes to show that you have to have your ducks in a row early on to get anything by the voters. One of the highest profile ballot initiatives that I'm sure you all were tracking was the California Teachers Association sponsored Prop 15, which would have removed the commercial property tax protections put in place by Prop 13 in 1978. So it would have been the biggest real estate tax increase in 4 decades. The vote was close, but ultimately 51.9% of voters rejected it. So they have officially called that, and it was one of the last remaining ones, but it has officially failed. So to us, what this means is, next year it's likely we'll see a myriad of revenue-raising bills. This could range from corporate taxes to taxes on high-income earners, even though the governor has gone out and said he doesn't support a wealth tax because we just become too reliant on those high-income earners. could repeal existing tax credits. A lot's going to be on the table, since the unions lost so big at the ballot box. And there's still gaping holes, especially in some of these local government jurisdictions. So what was interesting, and I'm sure you saw this in the LA area, a lot of local tax measures passed. So parcel taxes, executive compensation taxes up in the Bay Area, especially in more urban areas. We saw this trend of voters really tending to trust their locals more than, Sacramento politicians who lost every single, ballot measure that they put on the ballot. And voters pretty handedly rejected the legislature's proposition that would have overturned Prop 209, Prop 16, which would have allowed public agencies to reinstate affirmative action. It was defeated with pretty large margin of 56.9% of the vote, voters saying no to it, despite being outspent by supporters by 10 times. So proponents say they think by the last minute nature of the legislature to act, you'll recall this didn't pass out of the legislature until the middle of June, really right on the deadline of when you had to submit to the Secretary of State. So really, there wasn't a lot of time to educate the electorate and get out, the word. And sometimes some of the wording of those ballot initiatives can be really tricky, and it's a big obstacle to overcome. And that just, it didn't leave for enough time, despite being pretty well financed. So what do we expect for next year now that, the Biden-Harris ticket won handedly? Well, according to some. So as we know, Governor Newsom, he has to appoint a U.S. Senator to finish out the remaining 2 years of her term, of Senator Harris's term. He gets to make that decision on his own. That he doesn't have to, it doesn't require the vote of the legislature. So there's really no time limit on how long the governor has to fill that vacancy. I mean, some people laugh. I think he wants to probably do it sooner rather than later, because just he gets asked in every single press conference. He's going to be lobbied heavily by tons of special interests. We've already seen a lot of the ethnic caucuses, the Black Caucus and the Latino Caucus, holding events supporting members that they're supporting folks that they want to see appointed. So kind of the short list, even though it's a pretty long list of folks that we've heard, and this probably comes as no surprise to you all. But Secretary of State Alex Padilla, our Attorney General Javier Becerra, Congresswoman Bass, Congresswoman Barbara Lee in Oakland, Lieutenant Governor Elani Kounalakis, San Francisco Mayor London Breed. One of the new ones we've heard lately is Senate Pro Tem Tony Atkins. So obviously that could have big implications on the Senate and how leadership reigns for the next few years. And then Supervisor Hilda Solis down in your area of Los Angeles. So we'll see. We don't really know when we can expect that, but obviously we're working with January 20th deadline is when Harris would get sworn in. And we also expect to see, some key California leaders tapped to serve in the Biden-Harris administration in some capacity. And this could have implications on the legislative makeup as kind of the musical chairs continues and electeds move, into mayoral seats or congressional seats that might have been vacated due to, members moving to DC. So some of the names we've heard thrown out there, and again, I imagine these are no surprise to me, but your mayor, Eric Garcetti, Mary Nichols, the ARB chair, she already is termed out, and we know that we'll have a new CARB chair next year. Folks have speculated that she might be tapped as Cal EPA director. AG Becerra, or Attorney General Becerra, he definitely has interest in serving in a wider capacity in a Biden administration, and then as does Karen Bass down in your neck of the woods. So should their congressional seats open up, for example, or should the governor have a chance to appoint a new AG, they could definitely tap from the legislature, which would restart the whole musical chairs. And then speaking of vacancies, as far as the leadership and committee changes, there with Senator Mitchell leaving in the Senate, that opens up a really big chairmanship, which is Senate Budget. Also, due to members being termed out, we have openings in Judiciary, Labor, Transportation, Agriculture committees. So Democrats have a lot of mouths to feed as far as all the incoming Democrats now that they've expanded their caucus. So it'll be interesting. We'll have to see how they approach that. Do they divide up budget subcommittees so that they can have more leaders, Do they divide up big committees like energy and communication, so it's 2, or judiciary? Do they divide that up into a technology and judiciary committee? Again, just so they can tap more committee chairs, more, make sure that their members have ample fundraising opportunities by being put on, enough committees. Or, historically, we've seen the vice chairmanship go to a Republican, but now there are so few. Does it really make sense for each committee to have a Republican vice chair? And can they really serve in that capacity? So these are some of the questions they're going to be grappling with as they face, their new caucus makeup. And it should be really interesting that musical chairs, one of the biggest ones we can see potentially happening, and this is all potential. We know Senator Stern, for example, is very interested in a different chairmanship than he has currently, which is, a Senate Water and Natural Resources. So if he moves to something like Senate Judiciary, then obviously we have a new chair for Water Committee. So these are some of the changes we'll keep you apprised of, but will impact who we have to lobby next year, and so we'll make sure you're in the loop. And then I'll turn it back to Emily, who'll just talk a little bit more about the outlook for next year and what we can expect.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. So I definitely think, it's changing every day as far as how the legislature is going to convene next year. But I think no matter what, it's not going to be back to business as usual, especially come January. And I expect into March and maybe further, depending on, what happens with the vaccine. But definitely things are going to probably look like a little bit like what we saw last year. There were some rumblings in the beginning by members saying, well, why do we have to come back in January, February, and March are more meet and greets, informational hearings, rather than expose us, why don't we just come back in March? But I don't think that's gained any traction at this point. So I think we should all expect they still come back for their one day in December and then back fully in January. I still think, on the topic of remote voting, as you saw in those last nights of sessions, or at least heard about from our accounts, the Senate Republicans, all but one of them had a remote vote because of exposure potentially to COVID. However, as a result of it, some felt like they intentionally, whether they did or not, but some felt like they intentionally filibustered, talked at length for bills on the floor. And as a result, several key bills, including the pro tem's priority bill, didn't pass. Midnight struck and several bills hadn't passed. And so I think that will probably be taken into consideration as they consider if they're going to allow remote voting or not. I know, as far as committees go and what we do for your behalf as far as testifying or doing me toos on positions, last year they did allow for us to call in by phone. While the building was technically open to the public, they really discouraged us going into the building because they don't want us to expose, the members and staff that were allowed in the building potentially with COVID. There was talk a month ago from both leaders' offices about, how does remote voting work? I actually, quite frankly, thought it allowed for more people across the state to participate that wouldn't have otherwise been able to come to Sacramento in person. That being said, the hearings were very long. There's a lot of swearing and people dialing in and yelling obscenities and hanging up and dialing in again and again and again. And so I think the leaders have been working with AT&T is in charge of that phone system. And I think working over the last few months on training them on how to better identify, what's legitimate, what's not. And so hopefully those kinks will be worked out. Hopefully we will still be able to continue remote voting so your positions are known, in these public hearings. As far as bill capacity goes, I think the bills next year will still be focused on COVID related items, wildfire response, the important items, but I don't expect, and both pro tem and the speaker's office have not said that they will put a cap on the amount of bills that members can hold. I think what will just happen naturally is because right now the legislature is constrained about how many committee rooms they can use that can adequately hold people at a 6-foot distance. I think there are only 3 committee rooms for both houses for all those policy hearings. I think naturally it will be left up to the committee chairs to decide how many bills they hear in committees, and they'll end up being the bad guys by telling legislators, hey, we can't hear your bill. It's not COVID related. We don't need to hear this. And they're going to be the bad guys instead of the leaders telling them, no, you can only carry 5 bills. So that will again be something we should watch for. And I just think to end it, I know we really enjoyed having folks you all up to Sacramento for your lobby days. As far as next year goes, I think we should say we'll play it by ear as far as whether it's in person or, on Zoom. But my gut tells me we should just plan for it to be on Zoom and do maybe a day or two, you guys from your homes. And I'm sure you've done these already. And I think the legislators will appreciate that. So anyway, that's something we'll work with Patrick and EJ on as, we face the new year. And anyway, Jamie and I, that's it on our end. We're happy to answer any questions. And thanks for letting us take the time this afternoon.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you both, Emily and Jamie, for the update. And I'm going to open up the floor to any questions from my colleagues. So if there's any questions or comments, now's the time.
Mr. Chair, this is Gloria Gray.
Sure. President Gray.
Hi, thank you very much. First, I want to say hello to Emily and Jamie. Thank you very much for that report. You're always very thorough. Things are very different in COVID times, so it's always interesting to hear from you guys. And I'm looking forward when we can physically go back up to Sacramento, but I do understand the need to do what we're doing now. So hopefully, maybe the first part, maybe the middle of the year or whatever, we can see each other. But thank you very much for the work that you do on behalf of the agency. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Okay, thank you. Other board members? Okay.
No, thank you.
I'll go ahead and just ask a couple of questions. Thank you. I'll ask a couple of questions, and both covered a lot of ground. A lot of things that happened this past year that are beyond normal, of course. But for what it's worth, do you foresee any particular things coming back up in the news session about the environment or about water? Obviously, some things fell off last year or last session, but do you foresee any hot button issues or things that they will be focusing on, or maybe what's the State Water Resources Control Board focusing on that are going to come back in some way?
That's a great question, and I'm happy to chime in, but I'll let Jamie start first because I know she's had a recent conversation with the Water Board and has her pulse on our fellow water colleagues as far as what we're expecting in the water space, and additionally things like microplastics and other things on the coast.
Yeah, I think, for next year, really the Water Board is poised to just deal with, the impact like everybody else of COVID and what that means, especially financially for water districts throughout the state. We already had an issue where a lot of these, small systems especially were failing, and now they're being, their revenues aren't coming in because of COVID. We have a moratorium on shutoffs. So what they're trying to do, there's actually a hearing this afternoon, but they've issued surveys to water districts across the state to get a sense and feel for what those financial implications have been. And they plan to take that data, present it either to the legislature or to the Biden administration on why, or in Congress, on why, relief is needed. I know Director Gray had a great presentation in front of the PPIC on this issue of affordability, but really I think it's going to be front and center. Whether that means they will pursue a constitutional amendment to allow, changes in Prop 218 so that, different customer classes can subsidize others. There's really no sort of low income rate assistance for the folks that are trying to pay their bills. And so, I think they're going to take a hard look at that next year and try and figure out maybe a solution or something that can be done to assist those ratepayers. And then secondly, the administration, they've had, we've seen 3 large, or I guess 2 major executive orders on climate, in addition to their, the water resiliency portfolio, which had 124 actions that they really wanted to pursue in order to, respond to the impacts of climate change. So that really has gone nowhere because of COVID, and just, their attention has been elsewhere. So I think we can see that come up in some capacity next year. You have these 124 recommendations. What do you plan to do? Water recycling is one of their key priorities kind of throughout the document. But really, are you going to back it up with certain incentives or bonds or grant programs? So I think that all dovetails into a larger conversation on what economic recovery looks like. Is it going to be focused on climate resiliency and infrastructure? Is there going to be a bond effort in 2022 where a lot of those conversations can be plugged into? And water, it's not going to be a water bond per se, but can water infrastructure be on the table? So yeah, those are all things that I can think of in addition to implementing the biodiversity executive order, which could have implications on state water project, on different flow agreements and voluntary agreements that are underway. Everybody's kind of like, okay, well, you have this 2030 goal where you want to preserve 30% of inland waters. What does that mean? How do we get there? So the Water Board and Department of Natural Resources are going to be in charge of kind of coming up with definitions, coming up with tangible actions that they have to take in order to meet those metrics laid out in the executive order.
And thanks, Jamie. Just one more thing I would say, I know we were watching it last year, SB 625 by Senator Bradford dealing with Central Basin. We have not heard anything as far as, and that bill obviously did not progress at the last month of session, but we're still checking in with folks just generally to see what's going on as far as if there'll be an informational hearing, as far as if the proponents of that bill will need to maybe pivot and be on the defense should Central Basin do anything. So again, nothing at this moment. I think folks were focused on the elections, and maybe we'll be hearing more between now and the new year there.
Okay, great. And one of the things you mentioned that made me think of this too was that potential assistance for ratepayers. Obviously, all these moratoriums and shutoffs, and there have been a number of retail agencies that are having financial challenges that I'm hearing about. This may be completely off base, but I have no idea. But I'm also thinking I wouldn't be surprised if in that discussion in the new session, maybe even a member from our area leads that charge or takes up a mantle, perhaps. Just knowing the Southern California LA delegation. So that probably be something for us to watch, would be if one of those members is a leader on that, and how to West Basin participates and is a part of that conversation, let alone if we can be supportive to the member. But again, we know our members here, they're pretty progressive, so I wouldn't be surprised if somebody might be one of the ones leading the charge on that, because that's going to be a big issue, I think, coming up in the next year.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great point.
And the other thing is, there's going to be a lot of musical chairs from what we're starting to see already. And then, of course, redistricting is going to happen in the next year as well, if I'm not mistaken, or that process goes through, correct?
Yep. When the census is turned in, then, once those numbers are equated for, we'll start redistricting.
Okay. And then, of course, we don't even know what's going to happen with the Biden administration and if people get pulled and such, and then more people.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, because Kamala, our Attorney General Harris is from here. I think just the expectation is there's a familiarity with folks, and so if anyone's tapped, that, again, as Jamie mentioned, that means someone else will be put in those positions or appointed for those positions, and then that will be a trickle-down effect for where those people are coming from. So I think a lot of political opportunity depending on who gets appointed for that administration.
Great. Just a couple other things real quick. So obviously the Delta Tunnel is a huge issue. So I assume that will continue being one of the biggest topics of discussion in Sacramento next year. Is that what you're?
Yeah, I think so. And, it's kind of been put on the back burner as these voluntary agreements have been underway, and they've tried to come up with some sort of negotiation on how to move forward with flow requirements and, what the board put forward 2 years ago. Those have really stalled. So I think they're hoping that a new administration will come in and kind of serve as a moderator or a liaison to kind of move forward those conversations. And additionally, the Trump administration, we saw, as far as the Endangered Species Act, they rolled back a lot of those regulations, which made it a little bit easier for a path forward on the Delta tunnels. I think with the Biden administration, you're going to see them kind of halt some of those rollbacks, which might have additional implications on how to move forward with some of those agreements. But yeah, I mean, with the focus on infrastructure, hopefully the labor organizations that are supportive of the Delta tunnels, you know, kind of come forward and help shepherd that through and at least some sort of agreement. But, you know, the biodiversity executive order, we're just really not sure how that's going to impact everything. So we'll have to see.
Okay, well, let me just finish with a couple of other thoughts. The other thing, of course, being that the state is majority Democrat controlled, but obviously it's more like progressive Democrats versus moderate Democrats. So that's, I think, the new reality up in Sacramento, and we all have to navigate through that. So that's just going to be interesting to see how it plays out, as you see.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, as far as whether you want something passed or want something to die, it's going, as your advocates, it's going to be focused on before the bill gets to the floor, where you probably are going to have a hard time holding up anything. But whether it's in committees and asking for amendments, you're going to want to focus on, again, depending on which side you're on, the moderate Democratic subsector, or really shoring up your progressive votes so that the moderate leaning side of certain members, you know, doesn't vote no for it, basically.
Yeah, no, it's just going to be so interesting in the next few years, because these topics that, you know, like if it's oil production, fracking, or ocean desal, these lines get drawn between, a lot of times it's not even Democrat or Republican, it's the moderates versus progressives. And then, of course, now the Republican Party in the state is pretty much neutered. So it's just be interesting to see how everyone adapts now and get things through. Just because you have a supermajority doesn't mean everybody thinks alike. So
Right.
More of a commentary, I think, but it applies to everything we're trying to do and what the water community is trying to do. And the other thing I did read lately, of course, is we're trying to look at that human right to water. But obviously, COVID has challenged us, you know, on the finances and on how to get things accomplished, put everything on hold. Now we've got a new administration in Washington, but we've got a divided Congress. So we're still going to have to do a lot on our own, both at the state and at the local level. So I think we're going to be really relying on, you know, your expertise up there, but also our relationships with our members, and make sure that we're as in sync as possible for what we're trying to accomplish. So, and actually it dovetails into my last comment is, I completely understand. I don't see any way or reason to be traveling to Sacramento anytime soon. I mean, personally, I'm not traveling anywhere right now out of the state. I'm not going anywhere because this pandemic is so terrible. And until we have a vaccine and we can feel safe to go from point A to point B and not be quarantined, there's no reason. So I think that it seems like the legislature will figure out how they want to do their business. I'm very open to doing strategic meetings, of course, with members that are applicable. And probably the great thing is we don't have to stack them all up in a row necessarily. We can put them here and there when they're needed for different key members, and all from, yes, the comfort of the house. So I would say that I'm very open to how you guys want to construct that for next year. But lastly is I do think that we need to talk to go into probably January. And I don't know where all that noise is coming from, so I'm sorry. But as we get into January, was probably when we need to look at our priorities for the new year. So probably January or February. Emily and Jamie, I don't know, you know, you guys will guide us, but the board obviously needs to look at what the priorities are for next year and work cooperatively with you so we can lay out the plan.
Absolutely. And we'll plan to work with EJ and Patrick, who obviously will be communication with all of you on what our priorities are, so we can figure out what our messaging is and then what the appropriate timing is for engagement up here.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Is there any further questions from board members? I don't see any, I don't hear any. So I just want to say thanks to, oh, there's Carol, Director Kwan.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yes.
Director Kwan. I'm going to be sad we're not going to be running meeting to meeting like last year, where all of you, we whipped you into shape after all those back-to-backs, running upstairs and downstairs to the water board. So that'll be easier, right?
Well, yes, I was just going to say, because half the time it's faster to go through the stairs than the elevators.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, you're going up and down the stairs, 4 flights at a time, and but it's I don't know, it's really interesting and fun and exhilarating, and you all do such a great job of lining up our meetings, as well as the meetings with the state agencies. So let's keep our minds very open as we go into next year. And I know that the board will be coming back and figure out the strategies, the best path forward, relying on your expertise. We're looking forward to that. So thank you so much for this presentation.
Great, thank you, everyone.
I do
Nice
have-
seeing you.
I do have a,
Yeah, thank
before
you.
Go ahead.
yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, President.
Hi, thank you, Emily and Jamie. In light of the pandemic and kind of what's going on, which I think has made things different in terms of not only what's happening here in LA, but in Sacramento, do you anticipate a need to inform us more frequently than what you do? I can't remember. Do you guys normally do a report to us quarterly, every 6 months? Or what's your schedule in terms of reporting to us?
I think we do a report every time you all meet. So whatever that consistency is, I don't know, Patrick and EJ, is that every month or every 2 months?
Yeah, we have the written report every month, and maybe President Grace was referring to maybe this kind of in-person update, maybe have that more frequently.
Yeah, I'm talking about in person. I'm not talking about your written report.
Yeah, I think it's been basically, ad hoc, but what we could think through if you're interested, again, we don't want to talk your ears off, but, I
No.
think it makes sense to do one like a legislative kickoff one, what are you thinking?
Well, no, I know that things kind of will be happening because of all the different movement in terms of people being appointed or elected and so forth, and then some of the issues that you've talked about. So I don't know if there's a need, if you think there's a need to maybe come down, or not come down, but to talk to us more frequently based on some of the pending changes that may be made. It's always better in person because we have an opportunity to ask you questions and hear from you rather than a written report. But that's something that you can certainly talk with Patrick and EJ, and you guys can figure that out. But just to kind of put that on your mind, that it may be a need to come down and verbally talk to us, to Zoom meeting with us, so we can actually ask you questions about different issues they think that we need to converse about on our meetings, on our Zoom meetings. So I just want to mention that to you, and I know that Patrick is here and other board members.
Thank you for that, and we will definitely work with Patrick and EJ on doing possibly more Zoom meetings, especially because there are so many things that are going to be happening and changing on probably at some point in January, before then on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of things, even though these are recorded, a lot of things we don't like putting in writing. It's always done better verbally. So absolutely, and Patrick and EJ are great, telling us what it makes sense, and we'll provide that feedback too.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any last questions? All right. Well, thank you both, ladies, very much, and to your team that works behind the scenes to help you out. It's very much appreciated. And also those timely updates when you shoot them over that we get sent to us from our general manager. So it's good to know what's always going on, and you guys have been really on top of it. So thank you. All right.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
everyone. Bye.
Okay. Have a
You
great
too.
day.
Happy holidays.
Yes, you both too.
Thanks.
Happy holidays.
Okay, so Patrick, I guess we'll just stay with legislative if we want to do the federal right now. Is that?
Yeah, we can finish out the ledge, and if you want, we can then do the other information item and then skip back to the action item if you so choose. But right now, we can have EJ do his regular ledge update, particularly the federal one.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Patrick, Chairman Houston. And I really want to say thank you to the NPA team. I do know that they have left, but they've always been very kind and generous with their time as far as being willing to join us for these meetings. The unfortunate part of it is that 8 months out of the year, typically they would be at committee meetings, attending those on our behalf or tracking those items. But we do hope to get them to participate as much as possible, and they've always been willing whenever available. So I do know that our VSA report did come in late Friday afternoon. I hope that we were able to get it to you that day as soon as we got it from VSA. It is not included in the packet, but I do see it on the screen here today. And I wanted to point out that anticipating that some of the federal aspects of the national election would be undecided here during our November committee meeting, we have asked VSA to join us for our December committee meeting, and they'll be providing a very similar update to what you just heard from NPA, which will outline all of the election highlights and kind of talk a little bit more about the defined lame duck session, where we'll actually have a little bit more information. I would hope that by December, we would have possibly somebody conceding and kind of a transition process defined and a well laid out plan for that lame duck session. But we do have a couple of items here within the VSA report. Obviously, you've heard from potentially President-elect Biden that a COVID relief package should be one of the primary focal points of the lame duck session. This is an issue that West Face Municipal Water District has closely been tracking for the past several months, as there's been several opportunities to pass something, and we were hoping that it would include some sort of infrastructure component. And I wanted to highlight that today, that again, it still sounds like it would be a key piece of the lame duck session. And we actually just this morning received a stakeholder letter, and I believe that we were able to shoot it out to you this morning. We ourselves got it about 5:30 a.m. this morning from Washington, D.C. And it includes several stakeholder groups that West Face Municipal Water District participates in, including the American Water Works Association, the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies, and obviously water reuse, but also NACWA, NRWA, and the Water Environment Federation. They're reaching out to leadership, hoping really to get a focus on some water-related issues, some of which would be near and dear to West Face Municipal Water District. I think their primary priorities would be that providing at least $1.5 billion in assistance for low-income households for access to safe drinking water. That's an issue that Chair Houston, you just mentioned, and they're hoping to get that moving forward. Avoiding broad water use service disconnection moratoriums. Again, that's another issue that you brought up. California is very progressive when it comes to that issue. And in fact, I know that several retailers, not just from the West Basin service area, but statewide, have really been upfront about not just the need for the moratorium, but also some of the issues related to it. So how long it extends for and exactly what type of customer the moratorium includes. So there are some issues to be worked out, but also requesting that local water and wastewater systems be made explicitly eligible to receive a portion of any state and local budgetary assistance designated for offsetting revenue loss, which may be included in an upcoming relief package. So really, if you think about some retailers, wholesalers may be less impacted, but some retailers where you see that sharp decline in revenue because of residents and businesses that are unable to pay their bills, that does have an immediate impact on your ability for pay-go and to keep some of your infrastructure projects moving forward, including your R&R to maintain your systems. So it's really important that those agencies that are hurting financially due to the COVID pandemic, that there is an opportunity for them to access those funds. So I want to make sure that we got that letter to you, and we can, again, as Director Houston mentioned, we can really track those issues, because while at the wholesale level, not all of those will impact West Face Municipal Water District, they could have pretty significant impacts on some of our retailers. So we're going to continue to track that. The other, I think, real key issue is the continuing resolution. Obviously, the federal government has been using CRs, if you will, off and on for the past 7 to 8 years, especially heavily used during the Obama administration. But there is an expiration date on the current continuing resolution, and that's December 11th. So you'll have to see some sort of federal action or potential shutdown of the federal government, which at this time during a COVID pandemic, I really do not see happening. So we want to continue to track that. West Basin's continued effort when it talks about federal funding, our Water Resources Development Act of 2020. Again, West Basin has put in our markers. We typically ask for $5 million every year. We do have a letter of support circulating through Congress. Once we get all of those signatures from members of the House of Representatives, we will provide that to the directors. But that'll actually lead to our next effort, which will be a sit-down meeting with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers staff to really talk about the next steps for moving forward with the project. And we really do hope that something gets done in the near future. It would provide West Basin, I think, a little bit more rock solid information to base off our decision making when we move forward with some of our construction laterals that we're looking at. And I know that you'll be hearing quite a bit in the near future about the West Basin Water Recycling Master Plan. But really this funding, the $35 million authorization, that's going to help us make those decisions as we start to take pieces of that master plan and decide which recommendations we want to make as far as expanding our water recycling system. And I think with that being said, I'll leave it for Pete Evich and Jeff Bowman to fill in some of the gaps there as far as the lame duck session. I really do hope that some of the stall tactics or delays right now will get past those and really cement what Congress is going to be doing in this next, I believe it's 60 rough days of the lame duck session. So VSA will be here in December, and I look forward to hearing their report, but I am happy to answer any of your questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, EJ. Any questions or comments from board members? Okay, I don't hear any. Just a couple things, and I do know that by the time we see Pete and Jeff next month, a lot will have transpired, obviously, so we'll even know better information on a number of things. But a couple of things in the letter that came over from those guys, I did see. So we lost 2 Congress members in Orange County. We did lose them, Joel Cisneros and Harley Ruda, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
That we know of right now.
That we know of right now, exactly. So yeah, those 2 are now out. And what happened with Mike Garcia versus Christy Smith?
I have not seen
I think Christy Smith is a narrow lead. It was very, very close.
Okay. Okay, and you were going to say EJ?
I haven't seen that it's been finalized.
Okay, yeah, because that's over multiple counties, or at least 2 counties, if I'm not mistaken, right? So you get LA County is one thing, and then I think it's Ventura County, right, is the other one. So
right.
Today's Tuesday, right? So there'll be more ballots counted in both of those municipalities, but I haven't heard what it was yet either. And then TJ Cox, is that still up in the air up north?
The only thing I can say for sure is obviously that it hasn't been certified, but I'm not exactly sure when we.
Okay, got it. Well, anyways, obviously we'll know more in the next handful of weeks, and certainly when Pete and Jeff are here. And of course, more rumblings of who's going to move around on different things, I suppose. But the last thing too is, just to decide what's going to be the prerogative or the priorities of some of our local delegation going into next year, if they have any, for what it's worth. So perhaps you can give them a heads up if they have any insights into what some of our members might have, as their lead interests going into the new year, that we would just want to be aware of. And of course, obviously anything that deals with water infrastructure, hopefully that will rise to the top in the next administration and Congress. So
yes, and I think you can imagine that the Senate runoff races in Georgia, that will obviously make a significant impact as far as their priorities go, to see exactly what those numbers are in the Senate, to see the likelihood of pulling Republican votes in the Senate or getting something through. So we won't know the answers to the Georgia runoff race, I don't believe, that soon, but we will have a pretty big indicator once they identify all of their priorities for the lame duck session.
Okay. Good, good. All right. So really, there's not a whole lot going on at this exact moment. Any other last comments or questions from directors? Okay, I don't see any. So I think next month will be much more informational here. So I really appreciate it, EJ, and I look forward to seeing our folks from VSA next month. Okay, so now Patrick, well, you know what? I guess since we have EJ here, why don't we just do the 6B as in boy, the Metropolitan Water District report?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Patrick and Chair Houston. So before you is the Metropolitan Water District October report, begins on packet page 99. It leads off with obviously the election of President Gloria Gray as the chairwoman. We did actually have a chance to report this because our last month's committee, October committee meeting, actually was just after the election, so we were able to highlight that, but it is included in this board packet. Also, I wanted to highlight the MWD battery storage systems to optimize solar energy usage and reduce costs. That was approved at the October committee and board meeting. And this is fairly significant because Metropolitan Water District has done an excellent job of investing in renewable energy, solar panels, but we all know that storage is, you know, a key aspect of solar energy. And so this will actually reduce the electricity needed off the grid, typically for three significant facilities, as well as a pump station in the Metropolitan Water District system. You know, when you look at the total cost of the project, they authorized $2.2 million. The project total will be about $11 to $12 million. But what is very significant about this, and they did an excellent job of highlighting it in the committee, that with the energy savings and the cost savings, MWD is expected to recoup the cost of these projects within 3 years, which is pretty amazing when you talk about an $11 to $12 million project. So we are very excited to see that, and I think it speaks volumes about Southern California Water and reducing our energy footprint, because we typically hear that when you talk about energy usage in the state of California, they always highlight that water is one of the most or highest consumers of electricity in the state. So to see that and to see that it would have such significant impact, I really wanted to highlight it in this board memo. The last item that I have to specifically dive into is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council update. I know that Chair Houston, you've mentioned it in the past, as has President and Chairwoman Gloria Gray. This has been an ongoing effort. It was established in July 2020, and the council includes bargaining unit representatives and employee resource group representatives to provide insight on best practices, conduct a current climate assessment, and by that we mean the workplace climate, and develop a plan for improvement. This effort has included employee surveys and interviews, a review of MWD's policies and procedures, and an independent analysis as well. And I think one of the most telling pieces of this is that when Metropolitan Water District in committee, and of course at the board meeting, when they've had these items on their agenda, it does generate a lot of stakeholder and public comments and involvement. Obviously, some of the comments are very troubling. You know, whenever you hear stories of harassment or even worse, potential criminal acts, it really does speak to the need as far as looking at it and possibly having that third party come in and take a closer look. But I don't think that many people would question the need for the council. There have been some protests and people have commented that they were not participating for a reason or two. But I think that all in all, as the presentations have been ongoing, I think that the council, the need for the council is well established. What we did want to do is include the most recent committee update, and it's included in packet page 105. And this was a presentation that was provided on October 27th at the Special Organization Personnel and Technology Committee. So this obviously was a special meeting of the committee. You know, they get into a bit of the details as far as what the council is specifically, and that's on packet page 106, identifies all the different organizations. If you go on to packet page 107, it talks a little bit about the mission. Purpose is to promote and enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout the organization and ensure accountability and Metropolitan's commitment to create an inclusive culture and work environment that values diversity and equity for all Metropolitan employees. And I think that the theme of that purpose and mission is echoed in all of the presentations and even in some of the more harsh criticisms or critiques of the council. I think that if you look at it from a very basic premise, I think everybody has a very common goal. And so I think that that's extremely helpful. If you turn to packet page 108, you look at the specific scope of work. And I highlighted some of these as I was running through the board memo, but the employee survey and interviews, those are obviously extremely helpful. However, some employees have said that they did not feel comfortable responding to the surveys. Reviewing policies and procedures, I think that's a key aspect of it. Make sure that there's safeguards for when complaints or issues are identified. An in-depth analysis of employee sentiments towards raising concerns and internal investigatory processes. And again, this is, I think, at the ground level, that's the most important aspect, is that do you have an opportunity or means of remediating any sort of issue or concern? And I think that they're doing a great job of analyzing that. So the recommendation was to hire a consultant to assist with the creation and defining metrics for success. I do know that this was discussed this month. However, I was reviewing the tape, and I will report back on it next month. As my understanding is that they approved the selection of a consultant, but I would offer, obviously, Director Gloria Gray the opportunity to comment on that. I think that when you look at it, they're taking several next steps, which are identified on packet page 110. Additional training, a proposal for the DEI consultant services, which I believe was taken up just last week, and regular updates. So for those of you who are tracking this matter, this issue, this would be the committee to continue to watch, and they will have regular updates as things progress. And I'll stop there in case you have any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, EJ. Questions or comments?
Yeah, Chair Houston,
Sure.
I'd like to make some comments in addition to EJ. EJ, thank you. You're always very thorough and you're you're very knowledgeable of what happens at Metropolitan. I just wanted to add a few comments regarding the DEI, which I believe is a very important council as we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think a number of organizations are doing that, and certainly Metropolitan is doing the same. One of the things that I think it's important to mention is that the board, Metropolitan's board members had indicated, some of the members had indicated a desire to be more directly involved. And I think one way of making sure that all the board members were informed and involved to whatever extent they could be would be the fact that the DEI Council would make a presentation at the OP&T committee meeting every month. And I think EJ has just mentioned that did happen. And I think it will continue to happen because that is the committee where any issues regarding employee issues or any issues concerning employees would flow to that committee. And so I think that's a great place for the council to report the activities that have happened at that council meeting to the OP&T committee. And then the committee members can take whatever action is necessary that they feel and make a recommendation to the full board. So I think that will help in terms of the board members being directly involved. We did the last meeting with the DEI Council, of course, the issue of whether or not the council should continue, because there were some concerns expressed about some of the other employee resource groups who did not want to continue to be involved at this point. But all the employee resource groups and the bargaining units that did attend that meeting did indicate a desire to continue. And so from my perspective, I believe that the DEI Council will continue. And I've already talked about the way information will flow to the board and how the board can be directly involved in terms of taking any action that the board feels necessary as a result of the discussion of the DEI committee. There was an action taken at the last OP&T committee meeting where an independent outside counsel would be hired to look at some of the concerns that you've heard the public through public comments that you heard expressed through public comments. And so that recommendation to hire an independent counsel was made by the OP&T committee, and of course it flowed to the full board, and the board did approve that independent counsel. And so we're looking forward with that review. There are a number of other reviews that are being underway at Metropolitan to look at certain areas like some of the concerns in the desert. I think those are handled by Marcia Scully under legal. I think HR is doing also a review, and also the ethics officer will play a key role in terms of what happens with the independent counsel and some of the other reviews in terms of the outcome of those reviews. The information will flow directly to the board members, probably through the OP&T committee. And so I think that will help, alleviate some of the concerns that we will be looking at those issues with another independent counsel. And so I want to make sure that our board is aware that Metropolitan is taking, I believe, necessary action as we address some of the concerns that the employees have had.
Okay, great. Thank you. Other board members, questions, comments? Okay, I did have a couple things, EJ. And one is, President Gray obviously touched on it, but the DEI Council obviously had a number of groups that have indicated they're not going to participate. And I really think it's important that that kind of information is relayed to our board just so we know it. So I think that those kinds of details should be included in the write-up, because right now it doesn't say anything about who the groups are, but I know that there's a number of groups who have announced that they're not participating. So I think that's very relevant. And then the other thing is, I see that there was some funding approved, but I hear it was narrowly approved for the Sites Reservoir project, some $5 million or something like that, EJ. Is there anything you can give us some more detail on that?
Yes, Director Houston, I hadn't quite made it there yet, but
Okay.
You touched on my next talking point.
Oh, okay. You might as
so
well.
If you would like, I can begin there, but.
Yeah, you might as well. I thought you were completely done, but go ahead, yeah.
No. Metropolitan Water District every month has several very routine matters. We try to highlight some of the bigger issues at our MWD caucus meeting, and then I always try to highlight them as I go through this board memo. So packet page 102 actually has the next item that I think was most noteworthy to myself. Back in October, they did authorize the general manager to sign the second amendment to the 2019 Reservoir Project Agreement with the Sites Project Authority and other participants. As you mentioned, Director Houston, that was for $5 million. And this is important because a lot of people lose track of some of these key initiatives that actually began back in 2009 with the historic Delta package. You'll recall that was the initial legislation They had the 20% reduction requirement for all urban water retailers. It also set forth the Delta Stewardship Council and the process for a Delta fix, but it also talked about and hit significantly upon the need for surface storage in the state of California. While the ultimate bond proposition did get delayed by several years, it was supposed to go, I think, initially in 2010. They ultimately renegotiated that, and Proposition 1 was on the 2014 ballot. And it provided $2.7 billion for surface storage in the state of California, which initiated a significant legal fight as to where those funds were going to go, who was ultimately going to pay, and the initial discussion about, and you've probably heard the term, the beneficiaries shall pay. So while there are bond funds, it was a matter of who's going to most benefit from these surface water or surface storage projects. And Metropolitan Water District, obviously, as a significant player as a state water project contractor, the state WP, obviously, Metropolitan Water District has done a masterful job of moving water throughout the state of California and ensuring that there's flexibility and redundancy in the Metropolitan Water District system, which includes the State Water Project and obviously the CRA, the Colorado River. So what they try to do is move water when they can, when it's plentiful, but have flexibility and options when we're in our drier years. And surface storage, as we've seen with Diamond Valley Lake, plays a very significant part of that because Metropolitan Water District can leave water in some of these different reservoirs and move water through other means. For instance, if they were going to back up and utilize less water from the State Water Project and rely more on the CRA, they could actually store that water inside its reservoir. And so Metropolitan Water District has been an investor in this work plan process. They did authorize $5 million to be appropriated to the Phase 2 work plan based on reserving an option for 50,000 acre feet of water supply yield. And so that really defines where Metropolitan Water District is coming from. So if they're expecting a lot of water to come through the State Water Project and it's a great snowpack season and precipitation is very high, what they're looking for is an opportunity to store 50,000 acre feet there in Sites Reservoir, which would allow them additional flexibility and redundancy within the system. So this is very consistent with Metropolitan Water District strategies when you look at the overall imported water supplies focus. And so that item was, I thought, it was an interesting presentation by staff. And I think that Jeff and his staff over the last 2 months have touched on it, but it's something that West Basin staff continues to track. The second item is just below that. I wanted to highlight this because the board authorized the use of up to $2.75 million annually for the conservation program budget for the multifamily property toilet replacement program. And just as some background, President Gloria Gray, chairwoman of the Metropolitan Water District Board, has always been a very proactive supporter of investments in the disadvantaged communities. And this discussion actually was created under the disadvantaged community guise as far as trying to make sure that some of these communities have opportunities for investments in water use efficiency and conservation. Unfortunately, due to the Metropolitan Water District Act, Metropolitan Water District can't actually run a program specific for disadvantaged communities. But what they can do is analyze the predominantly land use policies and density that are in most of our disadvantaged communities, and then build programs that are built upon serving that type of land use. And in this case, you talk about multifamily housing. And ultimately, when you look at new construction, typically, California State Legislature passed legislation back in, I think, 2007 that reduced the flow of toilets. So you have your water use efficiency toilets. And so any new construction is going to have those. But what they felt was that if you look at some of the older construction in multifamily homes, they have not actually been able to change out those toilets. And so Metropolitan Water District did a pilot program for this, and the funding for the new toilet program actually was exhausted within a few hours. West Basin Service Area actually did an excellent job of recouping some of those costs because a lot of the chambers promoted it. But when you looked at the use of it, it was primarily the bulk of the toilets that were replaced in the West Basin Service Area was in the Marina Del Rey area where you have those high-rise multifamily homes. So this is going to be a re-up of that program. It's $2.75 million, which I believe is a little bit higher than they originally did in the pilot program. But it's something that we're very excited about. Again, in our high density areas of the West Basin Service Area, we have a lot of multifamily homes. So this is a great opportunity. And Metropolitan Water District did an excellent job of working with vendors. So working with the contractors that would come into those multifamily high-rise buildings and just do large swaths of toilets. So they would do 150, 250, 350 units, and they would knock those out in a few days. And so I would expect certain portions of the service area to, again, do very well when it comes to that. And really, when it comes to all of the activities and the actions taken at Metropolitan Water District, I thought that those were the most immediate needs to highlight. But I did want to talk a little bit about our water supply as it stands right now. As we begin the process of stepping into the new water year and we have high hopes, everybody talks about a potential La Nina situation, which could be a drier year than normal. So a less dense snowpack, which could impact our spring and our summer months. But whenever you tend to look at those items and you start to track your precipitation and your ultimately your snowpack, you start to look at storage to see what can you withstand. So by that I mean, if you have a low precipitation year and a low snowpack year, how many years can you handle that? And again, Metropolitan Water District continues to do an excellent job of working with stakeholders, not just within the state, but out of state as well, to store water wherever they can. And I've mentioned this before, but Metropolitan Water District has had historic puts where they would store water for the past 2 years. So they've actually broken their records for the past 2 years, and they right now have more storage than they've really ever had before. And I think that speaks volumes as far as some of their staff members when it comes to making sure that they are prepared for a drier year. So you can see there in our, I believe it's packet page 114. If you can scroll, actually back one slide, I guess it's packet page 113. And right there on the bottom left quadrant in the center panel there, you see that 3.1 and 3.1 million acre feet there. And I think that that is for somebody like myself or anybody in water planning, when we talk about our ability to withstand dry years, that 3.1 million acre feet gives you kind of that comfortable feeling about exactly where we are as a region, because that should replicate about a 3-year supply. So that means that not only are you going to receive some water from the State Water Project and Colorado River, but if those resources were to be shut off, we would have a continued 3-year supply just from Diamond Valley Lake alone. But you do have your Colorado River, which your Meade and Lake Powell, this is just to your left. Obviously, storage there is very typical. It's somewhat political as far as how they move water through the Colorado River, and of course their storage. It's quite normal, I would say, for this time of year. If you move to your right, you can see that they had begun the process now for the past several months. On the very top of that portion, you see Lake Oroville. And every year at this time, October, November, and into December, they try to reduce the storage there. And that's ultimately for precipitation that they hope to capture. So you need to have room in the Lake Oroville in order to move water through the system. Likewise, in San Luis Reservoir, just below that, which is at 46%. But again, if you look at the bottom portion of that, when you talk about Castaic and Diamond Valley Lake, you're looking at 79% and 87%, which is extremely healthy because it provides room for additional storage. So as we get some rain, hopefully in these next month or two, we now have room for that. And of course, we have virtually no snowpack to date. So that's going to be something that we continue to track. So typically by now, November, we hope to have had at least a couple of storms. It is my understanding that they are expecting one of those atmospheric rivers to come into Northern California. I believe it's next week, so we're hopeful there. We'll continue to track it, and hopefully by December, we have a little bit more better outlook as far as our wet year this year. So Chair Houston, that's all I have unless you have any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, EJ. I just have just a couple of questions. One is I remember when we had our caucus meeting that month prior, so I guess this is October. We're talking about October. So I remember we talked a lot about the toilets and the multi-unit buildings. We didn't really talk a lot about the site's reservoir. And then I see that it was a very mixed vote for that approval. But how did our directors vote on that?
It's my understanding that they voted affirmative on the action.
Okay. Because again, that was something that I just don't recall us having a heavy conversation about, just to even understand the issues. And then apparently it was a very narrow vote. So I think I think it's really important for the board to understand what transpired. So I would like to ask that in the future, I'd like to get the vote counts when those are published, because those are never provided to the board, to this board. So I'd like to get those, at least for me. If other directors don't want them, that's fine, but I'd ask for that, please. So we know how our directors vote on MET. And the other thing is that I also saw that there was, a letter from Mayor Garcia, because it got published and it was out in a few different sources, but it did let the chairwoman know of priorities for Los Angeles as he continued to support her chairwomanship. And so I see there's a number of issues that are very high priority for Los Angeles that this board was not aware of. So I just think that we need to get as much information as possible from our staff and from our directors, and that has not been happening. So I'm just requesting it once more. But my thing that I would like is going forward, please send me the vote counts of the meetings. I really appreciate that. And so I have no other comments or questions at this time, but I see Chair Gray has got your microphone on. So go ahead.
I left you. Yeah. I'm trying to understand the information that the full board needs, and I know you've expressed some specific things you need. I know that there's certain things that are just sent to board members of Metropolitan Water District Board. So I'm not quite sure how EJ can determine how much more information you need unless it's specifically that you asked, and which you did. And you made the comment about our board members were not being made aware. And I think we had this discussion at some point about the different ways that board members are being informed. And so I know that you have been online at the different meetings for Metropolitan. So certainly you've heard the discussion. I believe you've been online when we've had committee meetings, so you've heard that discussion. So I'm not quite sure what more you want except the specific things you've asked for today. And so is there some other way that you're trying to indicate that you'd like for you or the other board members to be informed? Because of COVID-19, we do have the Zoom meeting. So it really gives all of us an opportunity to hear the discussions at most meetings, and certainly at Metropolitan, because they are public meetings. And so I'm not quite sure what more you want except what you specifically asked of EJ.
Sure. I think at this point, I would just like to get the vote counts. So once they've happened, if they could be sent to me. I know that there's a number of things that get sent out from Metropolitan to the directors there and to the general managers. A lot of things obviously don't get forwarded to our board members.
Right.
And we've had that back and forth in the past. And I know there's a lot of information, so sometimes there's things that are probably irrelevant. But at this point, what I'd like to get would be the vote count. So I do understand, voted and how. And then separately, I think that these issues that maybe they weren't controversial prior, and yet they ended up controversial, we should have an understanding of why they were controversial. So that site's reservoir apparently was a very split vote, but that wasn't something that we really talked heavily about prior to that happening. So maybe in a post-analysis, that's the type of thing you guys could come back and say, here's what happened and why it happened that way. We talked that month a lot about the multi-unit toilet program, which of course nobody could disagree with that. I don't even remember a discussion of the site thing, but then I see that it was apparently controversial at Metropolitan. So, it's good that not just this board, but our own district as a whole, the ratepayers in this district understand, our representation as a Met member agency and what that means for these policy decisions.
Well, I think the point I'm making, Director Houston, is that you're very much aware of the discussion at committee and board level. And so you've heard that discussion when the vote is taken, unless you're not listening to it, because I know you've been online. And so you've heard comments from other board members, as well as if your representatives have made comments. So after the vote, I know EJ gives a report on what happens. So I'm not quite sure what more you're asking for, except a list of the votes that you've already heard that was taken at the board meeting and the committee meeting. So you've heard all the discussion.
You are accurate, Chair Gray, and I guess maybe what I'll do is post-event or what have you, I'll ask why the directors voted the way they did, so you guys can explain to me and to our ratepayers why we took that position. Maybe that's the best way to do that. So for now, I'm just asking for the vote tallies. I think that we should have some better engagement on the controversial issues, as well as have objective input coming from our staff when it comes to what transpired at Metropolitan. Because when I am listening to these meetings, there's a lot more going on than we see in these reports. So I don't know how to best answer the question at the moment. I think again, we didn't talk about how West Basin was going to position itself on that particular project. I guess that's what I'm saying. And so a vote was taken that we didn't discuss ahead of time. So how could I put in my input?
Well, and that's a good point. But my point is that it's been an ongoing discussion. I mean, this vote did not take place without other discussions in the past. And so I think all of the board members, not just you, but all of the board members have an opportunity to express their opinion about it. I mean, the vote didn't just take place without any discussion before that vote was taken. So, I think, it's incumbent upon you and any other board member who has a perspective about any issue that Metropolitan looks at and your representatives makes a decision on, that you have an opportunity to express yourself. So I think that's your responsibility to do that. So not just when the vote is being taken. So I think we all need to be aware of the issues that are coming forth before Metropolitan. And certainly if you have an opinion in terms of what you or any other board member on our board would like to express to your representatives, then you should absolutely do that before the vote is taken. And what is coming up because you see the agendas and you certainly are aware of the meeting. So I encourage you to express your opinion.
Okay, very good. And I will do that. And also just please, going forward, send me the vote tallies. I'd appreciate that. Let's see. So thank you, EJ. Is there anything else, Gray?
No, but thank you, EJ. Again, you're always very thorough in your reporting, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Let's see. I think that's everything. Any other questions or comments for EJ, board members?
Nope.
Okay. Give me 1 second. All right, next we'll go back to our action calendar, Patrick. So
Yeah,
item 5A.
That's correct. And we'll follow up with that request on the vote count and also the remark that we were having forthcoming with all the information. I thought we were doing that, but we'll work on that. Yeah, 5A is our only action calendar item, and it pertains to a requirement by from the California Water Code to do an urban water management plan every 5 years. And basically, this is to look at what our future demands look like and how we're going to meet those demands. So it's a sort of demand versus supply analysis for the upcoming 5 years. And so this particular item is about the selection of a consultant to do that work for us, which is due next year. So EJ, you're back again. Thank you. Present, please.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. Chair Houston, members of the board, and guests today. The item before you is an award agreement for the development of West Basin's 2020 Urban Water Management Plan. As you probably remember, urban water suppliers are required to submit to the Department of Water Resources an urban water management plan every 5 years. So the 2020 Urban Water Management Plan is due on July 1st of 2020. The idea is that these plans support the supplier's long-term resources planning to ensure that adequate water supplies are available. These provisions that are the requirements of an urban water management plan are actually included in the California Water Code, sections 10608, as well as 10610 through 10656. So you can see it's somewhat of a dense provision within the Urban Water Management Planning Act, which is included in the California Water Code. And the one thing that we wanted to highlight is that the requirements of an urban water management plan are continuing to evolve every single year. It seems like there's additional legislation that would amend the Urban Water Management Planning Act, providing additional requirements of that. But ultimately, suppliers are required to assess the reliability of water sources available within the service area, to describe demand management measures and water shortage contingency plans, to report progress toward meeting the 20% reduction in per capita water consumption, as well as to analyze the use and planned use of recycled water in the service area. Now, there are a few items that make this year somewhat unique from past years as far as the urban water management plan. First of all, as I just mentioned, there are numerous changes to the California Water Code since the 2015 plan. Secondly, there was a delay in the release of the Department of Water Resources guidebook, which actually outlines the specific provisions that are required in an urban water management plan. And the third, and I've noted this, I believe in the, if you look at the background, paragraph 3, it notes that preparing an urban water management plan will vary greatly depending on the water supplier and the availability of accurate demand projections and supply forecasts. And the reason I wanted to note that is because as we looked as staff through the 2015 Urban Water Management Plan, we sought to see exactly how much of the information that we acquired at that time could be reutilized as far as our models and our existing projections. And the one thing that we wanted to note was that in our 2015 projections, they were somewhat far off. If you look at the projected imported water demand for 2020, it was roughly 135,000 acre feet, a little bit more actually. And for those of you who've had a chance to look at our water use report that's published on our website every single year, it's about 105 to 106,000 acre feet. So that's a pretty significant difference. And when you look at the climate in the Southern California area as far as drought, you can see numerous reasons why those projections would be somewhat off. First, as I mentioned, the drought restrictions that were required back in 2017, when you looked at the thickness of the drought 2015 through 2017, and Governor Brown at that time really mandating that everybody reduce. You saw specific reduction requirements. You saw significant investments, not only from state agencies, but also Metropolitan Water District, educating everybody on the need to conserve. So you saw that additional messaging. Also, you saw the ability for new technology, water use efficiency technology, to actually catch up. As I pointed out in a previous item, when you go back to legislation in 2007 and beyond, the legislature really started to hit, I would say, home runs when they eliminated all those high volume toilets. They allowed for waterless urinals, and they really started to mandate specific reductions in outdoor water use. So when you look at all of that combined, and then you look at the amendment in the adjudication of the West Coast and Central Basins, you really see a volatility that will affect and impact your total water demand. So when I looked at that 2015 Urban Water Management Plan, it really said to me and to our staff that we needed to take an additional look at some of the models that we utilized and demand management models moving forward. And secondly, we hope to actually utilize several key components of this Urban Water Management Plan for strategic decision making in the future years, because all the information that we acquire throughout this process will be provided to, of course, the board of directors. So as you weigh future water supply projects in the future, you'll have a very accurate report. And as such, there are additional costs, I think, in the development of this Urban Water Management Plan. So staff did prepare a request for proposals for professional engineering services for the development of the Urban Water Management Plan. A total of 511 consulting firms received the RFP notice, and 57 consulting firms assessed the RFP, or accessed the RFP, excuse me. By the closing date, we did receive 2 proposals from qualified firms. We did interview those firms, and the scoring is there in Table A. And I did want to highlight, obviously, the disparity in the cost of the proposal. And we did actually include the proposal that was prepared for Water Systems Consulting, Inc., which was staff's recommendation. When you looked at the cost proposals, and these are the costs that were identified in the written proposals themselves. And the reason I point that out is because when we met with and interviewed the other firm, they immediately noted that they were unaware of several of the different changes in the California Water Code. And as such, they would have additional costs necessary in order to produce an urban water management plan that actually met the specific requirements of the California Water Code. Secondly, in the proposal, Water Systems Consulting really understood the needs of West Basin Municipal Water District to really kind of reconstruct and prepare new demand management models for not just the West Basin service area, but potentially for all of the individual retailers, because each of our individual retailers will have a specific strategy. And as I mentioned, with the amendment to the adjudication in the West Coast Basin, the use of groundwater increasing or decreasing in future years will have a significant impact on West Basin Municipal Water District, especially when it comes to the use of imported water. So just below that Table A, you see that WSE is a civil and environmental engineering firm that specializes in the planning, design, evaluation, and optimization of multiple drinking water, wastewater, and recycled water systems. WSC services special districts, cities, counties, investor-owned utilities, and regulatory agencies throughout California, Oregon, and Washington. And the paragraph below that, and I think that this is a point that I'd really like to stress, is that when we read the proposals, obviously we saw a disparity between the 2 written proposals. WSC seemed to have a better understanding of the needs of West Basin Municipal Water District. But I can't speak enough about not just their written proposal that you have before you, but the presentation that they provided to the selection panel was one of the best that I've seen while at West Basin Municipal Water District. Their approach and their understanding of not just West Basin, but our individual retailers and the supplying agencies around West Basin, including Metropolitan Water District, LA Department of Water Resources, and the Water Replenishment District of Southern California. Their understanding of the projects that they were proposing and the potential impacts to West Basin really set them apart as far as where we thought they could come in and assist us. Further, WSC's demonstration and a detailed understanding of our planning efforts were presented to us. So as you know, West Basin has been undergoing several different planning efforts, whether it be the Water Recycling Master Plan or our water use efficiency data gathering, our data analysis. Those documents provide excellent tools to West Basin in the development of our urban water management plan. And it's really important that all of those reports sync up. So you really have to have a detailed understanding of what those reports not only project and say, but also the strategies that are underlying those proposals. And I thought that WSC provided an excellent overview. And last but not least, WSC expressed a flexibility and identified multiple methods of developing the proposed demand management models, which could lower the cost of the total project. And I want to highlight this because staff's recommendation ultimately be to authorize the general manager to enter into an agreement with WSC for the development of the urban water management plan. And as you recall, under most scenarios, when West Basin staff provides these, there's usually a 10% contingency that West Basin staff typically ask for in case costs go up or there are additional financial impacts as far as developing these programs. But in speaking with WSC, they identified a couple of different scenarios and methodologies that could actually speed up the process and actually reduce cost. Secondly, they provided kind of some insight as far as gathering the information that would be required to develop the demand management models, to produce the urban water management plan, but also do some follow-up work so that West Basin staff has these models and these tools, again, for making recommendations to West Basin in the future. So with that, staff's recommendation is that the board authorize the general manager to enter into an agreement with Water Systems Consulting Incorporated, located in San Luis Obispo, California, for the development of the urban water management plan in the amount of $309,100. And staff is available to answer any questions, but I did want to point out also that we do have a guest here at the meeting. Rob Morrow is the principal consultant with WSC. He is the one who actually provided the panel with the presentation that I've highlighted here today. So if you have any specific questions for myself, I'd be happy to answer. And I think Rob might be able to answer any additional questions as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, EJ. Are there any questions or comments from my board member colleagues? Member Gray or no?
Thank you. Thank you very much. No.
Sorry, no, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Go
Scott.
ahead. Okay. Let's see. I just want to ask a couple questions, and thank you, Rob, for being here. But the first question really is, what is the typical cost of doing something like this, EJ?
So it really varies, and I point that out when I've had conversations with the city of Santa Monica and the city of Torrance. They've looked at anywhere from a $100,000 to $150,000 dollar model. When we look at somebody like San Diego County Water Authority or the municipal water districts of Orange County, they provide different services to their individual retailers, and they're anywhere from the $300,000 range up into above $500,000. So it really depends kind of on what you're asking your consultant to do. Again, I want to point out that under a better scenario, if our 2015, if we hadn't had so many changes within the West Basin service area, and by that I mean the amendment to the adjudication and the change in groundwater in the West Basin or West Coast Basin, really potentially changes the water demand and water supply available to West Basin. because you have now the opportunity to not only store water for additional years, but you also have the opportunity to augment water supply. So individual pumpers can actually inject additional groundwater and extract that groundwater. So it really provides additional opportunities to the West Basin service area that we did not have back in 2015.
Okay, great. And these are 5-year plans, right? Is that accurate?
No, that's, so these will actually take a look at 20 to 25 years into the future. So you talk about Metropolitan Water District doing their IRP, their Integrated Resources Plan. The Urban Water Management Plan is required to actually take, I believe it's a 20-year look into the future as far as our total water supply. But West Basin obviously will be looking at several different aspects. And again, the demand modeling for the West Basin service area and our individual retailers is really the core aspect of the Urban Water Management Plan.
Yeah, EJ, I would add that the plans are required to be done every 5 years, even though the look ahead is much
yes,
longer.
correct.
Okay, yeah, which I just saw that in this paragraph. So yeah, that may have been where I was a little confused. So every 5 years we submit it, but they're looking out around 20 years.
Correct.
Correct.
Is there a reason why only 2 vendors even bothered to submit proposals out of all those vendors that looked at it?
So while I wouldn't want to guess, I would point out that if you look at the background and the paragraph there, you'll see that the California Water Code actually requires water suppliers and wholesalers, both public and private, providing water for municipal purposes for 3,000 plus customers or more than 3,000 acre feet. So really anything but a very, very small water system. And when you look at the number of civil engineering firms that do this work, there's just too many urban water management plans. So I don't think that it's unexpected that you'll have a small number of vendors put in for it. But obviously, I think West Basin did an excellent job of getting the word out in looking at our total numbers of 511 engineering firms receiving the documentation. And of course, I believe it was 57 of them accessing the documents.
Okay, yeah, because, and I read this presentation, which I think was excellent. So I think that it looks like we're picking a very great organization to do this. So I definitely have a lot of faith in Water Systems Consulting. It sounds like MNS, for some odd reason, didn't know what they were doing. If they, you were explaining that they didn't seem to understand what they're bidding on. I mean, any thoughts on this?
Well, I would like to say that obviously when you talk about an urban water management plan, you have the core concepts that are required by the California Water Code. Prior to us setting the appointment, they admitted that their original proposal didn't include some of the newer aspects of the California Water Code, so they were unaware of those changes. But I think that this speaks to the fact that there are engineering firms that work for smaller retailers or smaller wholesalers that come in with maybe a cookie cutter approach. And I don't want to say that that's what they were proposing, but I think that their intention was to provide a document that would meet the specific standards of the California Water Code, but wouldn't provide the additional analysis that West Basin is looking for.
Okay, and then lastly, and I see in here, so this is supposed to be submitted middle of next year, right?
Correct.
That is correct.
Okay. So does that mean they try and get it finished, with a month to spare or 2 months to spare, just in case, or any last minute changes? Do you hear what I'm getting at? I'm curious on the timetable. Okay.
So they would try to deliver it 1 month prior. We'll work out the schedule as soon as we have the contract with them and build out kind of the work plan as far as developing the document. But ultimately, this will have to be approved by the West Basin Board of Directors prior to being submitted. So it would come back to the board.
Okay, got it. And then last but not least, and this will be a new plan that is put together for, having not done one for 5 years by this point. What do we do with it then? Not just send it to the state, but what do we do with what they come up with?
Well, ultimately, this will go to the cities within the West Basin service area as well as our retailers. But ultimately, and you've seen this before as far as the West Basin presentations, whenever we talk about water supply and projections on demand, we obviously try to utilize the data that we have available. And we'll continue to tweak or adjust the data as needed. Ultimately, we hope that the information and the data provided by the company that we select, we hope to utilize that data as far as all of our planning in the future. When we talk about how our retailers will meet their new water use efficiency targets, which will actually be adopted in, I believe, 2022, and they'll be required to meet those requirements by, I think, 2023. So we'll be able to utilize these demand models to kind of assist them as far as their compliance. We'll be able to track the entire West Basin service area and obviously make recommendations to the board as far as how the West Basin service area can provide enough water supply for all of our retailers for the next 20 years.
Let me ask one other question, and maybe Rob can answer it. I don't know, but yeah, obviously it's a very objective, right? Hi, Rob. This is a very objective process. True that when they're looking at all of our supply sources, they're looking at it, from a in a very non, how do I say it? You're a very objective process. There's no bias built into this. Am I accurate in that?
Well, I'll go ahead and, go ahead. Let me start that off, and then I'll hand it off to Rob. Some of the questions that we asked of WSC when we were interviewing them was to make sure that what we provide them and the information that we're looking at as far as our water recycling master plan, that we make sure that that's taken into account, because we do have strategies as far as expanding that. So while it is objective when we talk about the total demand and the total water supply that we have available to us, we do have some opportunity to expand our potential supply, meaning the expansion of the water recycling facility. So our intention is that the urban water management plan will be very lockstep with our water recycling master plan when both of them are complete. And I know that Rob has a great deal of experience as far as putting these urban water management plans together, so I'll allow him to maybe touch on this as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think the only thing I'll just add is that we're predicting the future in a sense, and so we're obviously not going to be perfect. And so part of this is also acknowledging the risks and uncertainties that are going into the projections, and acknowledging the key assumptions that go into them, so that 2 or 3 years from now, when you have the plan and some of those have developed and are firmer, you're able to update them. And so that's part of the tools we're planning to deliver, so that EJ and team can run with them once some of those uncertainties become better known.
Okay. I just wanted to, I want to make sure that we don't have preconceived notions of what all the solutions are, and I'm not even saying that that's what would happen. But now that I've been on the board a while and I understand dynamics of things in the water community, I just think that it's good for decision makers to have very straightforward information to make decisions that are long term. And so now that I'm in a little more experienced position, looking at this again, because I've been on the board for 6 years, so obviously I was there last time this came through, but I was brand new. But to just understand it in a more holistic way, that we need very objective information, and then obviously knowing our resources, what our options are. So we're looking at recycled water, we look at desal, we look at bracket, we look at all of the above, so we can have very candid conversations as to the best path forward. So I'm really looking forward to the completion of this, so I can understand it and look at it relative to what we were saying maybe 5 years ago and 10 years ago. So, but I just wanted to ask the question, just to ensure that every potential look at this is as objective as possible, so no one could read into it that we were trying to create a direction or a narrative. You know what I'm saying. So I just wanted to at least inquire and put that out there from my perspective. And I see President Gray.
Yeah. Uh, I'm trying to understand your point about, any biases in the analysis or development of the plan. Perhaps Mr. Morrow can explain the process by which you gather the information. Could you explain that process?
Yeah, sure. So for example, demand projections are based on historical demands and information we're getting from each of your retailers, and then projecting in the future based on publicly published growth projections from SCAG or other places. And then again, we acknowledge that maybe those aren't, maybe there's alternative projections that you could consider: slower growth, faster growth, and just seeing what that means for West Basin. And so our approach is to document those assumptions clearly so they can be revisited if needed. And then we project supplies and demands, and obviously projecting the exact availability of metropolitan water 30 years into the future isn't exact, but there's a lot of work that goes into it through the IRP and other things. And so refer to that, and again, acknowledge there may be a range there. And then you put those two together and see if there's any gaps, or where, if there are potential future scenarios where there may be gaps, what that may present, and look at things to monitor in the future if you're headed that way.
Right. So the process includes information from a number of sources, correct? Right. Okay. All right. I think that's important to me because I think that eliminates as much risk of any biases because you are gathering information from various sources. I was just reading a statement that says specifically, the Urban Water Management Plan shall analyze the reliability of water sources, which I think is very important, the reliability of those sources that you are looking into. And obviously it says as it relates to a 25-year planning time frame. So do you compare what was done 5 years ago in terms of your analysis now?
Yeah, well, we look back what was projected and what turned out to be good information and what were assumptions that could be improved on. Right. And yes, as you know, in the water world, you're not looking at average. You want to right. Do well in a drought and then make sure you're planning for the future term wet periods. And so we're looking at the range of conditions over those 25 years.
Okay. All right.
Okay, great, thank you. And I think actually, President Gray, you hit the nail on the head and what I was also getting at, because what I've seen is that some of the projections that were out there in the past did not pan out to reality, whether it's from our own location, and I'm not even saying our agency, our location, as well as the greater region. So, and there's a lot of people putting out all kinds of information. Some of it's probably very incorrect to say that our water demands are down, or what we expected is inaccurate or didn't, come to be. So I think now more than ever, it's very imperative that these types of plans, really have the most objective look at it, so we can make good decisions that don't show we were being in any way, shape, or form biased toward one direction or another for solutions. So it's really what I'm getting at is, it's not my personal bias or position here. I'm saying what I see out in the communities right now. The communities are telling us a lot of different things, and some of that is accurate and some of that's not. So I'm again looking forward to Rob and your team. You're going to get this data. You're going to find out what's going on in our communities, in our region. I think it's going to be tremendously instrumental for us to make the long-term planning that we are going to be embarking on once this is accomplished. So obviously next fall, the board is going to probably be having some very heavy conversations coming out of your study as to what's the next direction of West Basin. Because right now we're still operating on that old phase. We're on that old plan. And obviously this year has pretty much knocked everybody out of the loop for getting a lot of things accomplished with COVID. So, you know, it's going to be a good opportunity for us to reset this and have new and updated data. And I want to make sure we understand, you know, if there's folks that are out there saying things that are inaccurate, then we have data to prove they're wrong, and vice versa. If we had bad assumptions, that our assumptions are now corrected. So anyway, I'm very excited about it. I just, you know, it's obviously part of our duty is to make sure that we get the best information and everybody involved knows that that's what we're relying on. That's what we need. And by the way, I read your plan. I think it's really great. I think you guys obviously have tremendous credentials, you know, so you know, I'm very pleased with you being our partner, and I look forward to that. Okay, any last questions?
Nope.
Okay, so with that, EJ, I don't recall if you read the recommendation or not, but if you haven't, or let's read it again.
Yeah, we did.
Well, let's just read it again. How about that? Please.
Yes, thank you, Chair Houston. Staff's recommendation is that the board authorize the general manager to enter into an agreement with Water Systems Consulting Incorporated, located in San Luis Obispo, for the development of their urban water management plan in the amount of $309,100.
Okay, great. So I would recommend approval be moved forward to the board. President Gray, do you concur?
I concur.
Excellent. Okay, great. Well, thank you. And got another step to go, Rob, but thank you for being here, and maybe early congrats to your team. You know, and you'll be working well with EJ and Patrick and our whole crew. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. We look forward to it. West Basin is top of the mark, so we're looking forward to the next year.
Thank you on that.
Thank you, Rob. We think so.
We are biased on that one. Okay, so let's see. We are now to item 7 is closed session, Pat.
That's correct, Chairman. We have no closed session today.
Okay, great. And now director's comments or future agenda items. President Gray.
Well, thank you to staff and our partners who were online today and made presentations. So thank you to all the staff also. And with that, I always want to tell folks, be safe.
Great,
Thank you.
Let's see, I see Director Kwan is on.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for, it's always a very comprehensive report. It's nice to see the two ladies from Sacramento. Thank you. Thank you for the meeting. Thank you, staff.
Excellent. Thank you. Director Deere?
Nothing else to add. It was a good meeting. Thank you.
Okay, great. And I just want to say as well, thank you. Really good reports, very thorough. And I know we went a little hours, but it was a really excellent always. So I appreciate that. And with that, we are adjourned. So thank you.
Bye-bye.